Grant Whitfield didn't lower his voice when he did it. "Remove her access," he told the banker, sliding the papers across the glass desk as if Alora were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong meeting. "All joint accounts, effective immediately." The words landed before she could process the screen in front of her, the one that had just refreshed to 0. Her hand was still resting on her stomach, instinctively protective, the ultrasound photo folded in her purse. 8 months pregnant, 36 hours since her last ER shift, 12 years of marriage reduced to a signature she hadn't been told was coming. "Grant," she said, her voice steady only because shock had frozen everything else. "We agreed this was temporary while I was on leave." He didn't look at her. "You're not on leave, Alora. You're unemployed." The banker avoided her eyes. The assistant in the corner pretended to organize folders that were already aligned. The air in the room shifted, subtle, cruel, the moment the system recognized her as no longer a client. If you've ever watched someone rewrite your life while you're still standing in it, you already know how this feels. Stay with me. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this is the moment everything begins. She tried again. "My name is on those accounts." "It was," Grant corrected, finally turning to her with the calm, rehearsed patience he used on junior partners. "But you haven't contributed income in 9 months. My firm advised me to protect our assets." The word burned. "I left the hospital because you asked me to," she said. "Because you said you didn't want your child raised by a stranger. And now I don't want my child raised in financial instability," he replied, "which is exactly where you are." Her chair scraped as she stood, the movement slow, deliberate, the way she'd been taught to control a trauma room. But there was no protocol for this, no attending to call, no surgical plan. "You let my license lapse," she said, the realization hitting all at once. "You handled the renewal. You said you mailed it." Grant adjusted his cufflinks. "Looks like an oversight." "Not an oversight, a strategy." The banker slid a printed statement toward her, formal, polite, final. The numbers were gone. So was the safety net she had believed in. So was the apartment lease she suddenly remembered was in his name alone. "I'll have my attorney contact you about the separation," Grant added, already gathering his things. "You should start making arrangements." "For what?" she asked, because the question forced him to say it. "For somewhere else to live." The room didn't spin. She didn't cry. Years in emergency medicine had trained her for impact. You stabilized first, you processed later. But when she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the Seattle rain hit her like cold reality. Sharp, immediate, inescapable. Her phone buzzed. A notification from Celeste Rowe's account. A photo of Grant smiling in a restaurant Alora had once loved. A caption floating beneath it, "Building a future." Alora stood there, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a bank envelope that proved she had just been erased. For the first time in her life, she had no income, no active medical license, no access to her own money, and nowhere to go before the baby came. And somewhere, beneath the shock and the humiliation, something else began to rise. Not panic, not grief. A question. If he planned this carefully, what else had he been hiding? The flight to Chicago was booked with the last credit card that still had her name on it. Alora landed with one small suitcase, swollen ankles, and a voicemail from Grant that said only, "We'll discuss custody when you get back." Her mother's church stood exactly the way it had in childhood. Red brick, white doors, the same narrow steps. But the moment she walked in, the air told her she didn't belong. Conversations stopped. Not out of grief, out of recognition. Her cousin, Rochelle, crossed her arms first. "You finally showed up." "I came as soon as I could," Alora said. "No one told me she was—" "You've been gone for years," Rochelle cut in. "Seattle, your big life, your big husband." Had. The word sat in Alora's throat, but she didn't give them the satisfaction. At the front of the sanctuary, she saw it. A single chair in the family row, white ribbon tied across the back, a printed card, Alora Bennett. For 1 second, her chest cracked open. He kept it for me. Her stepfather moved into the aisle before she could take a step toward it. That seat is symbolic, he said quietly, blocking her path. The program is already set. Symbolic? Her voice didn't shake. It has my name on it. You weren't here, he replied. Your mother needed you. We handled things. Handled things, like they had handled the house. The hospital decisions. The will she had never seen. Behind him, she caught the flicker of phones lifting. People pretending not to watch. You don't get to walk in now and sit in the front like nothing happened, Rochelle added. Alora looked past them to the casket. The only person in the room who had ever called her baby like it was a title instead of a weakness. I'm her daughter, she said. And you left, her stepfather answered. That was your choice. The power in the room shifted. Quiet, brutal, not grief, territory. Alora stepped back before her body betrayed her. Before the child inside her felt the surge of her heart, she took a seat in the last row, alone. Halfway through the service, a woman she didn't recognize stood along the side wall. Tailored black suit, silver hair pulled into a low knot. She wasn't crying. She was watching Alora, not with pity, with assessment. When the final hymn began, the woman walked down the side aisle and stopped beside her. You came without your husband, she said, voice low and precise. Yes. Good. The word landed like a key turning in a lock. From a leather folder, she slid a sealed envelope into Alora's hand. Heavy paper, legal weight. This was to be delivered only if you arrived alone, the woman said, and only if they refused you your place. Alora's fingers tightened around it. Who are you? Someone your mother trusted when she couldn't trust anyone else in this room. At the front, her stepfather had turned, watching, measuring. The woman followed Alora's gaze. Do not open it here. Do not speak to anyone about it. And do not let your husband know it exists. My husband and I know exactly what he did 3 days ago, the woman said, which is why you still have a future. The organ music swelled. People stood. The service was ending. The family row rose together, an unbroken line that did not include her. Alora remained seated, the envelope in her lap, her mother's name echoing in every corner of the church, while she sat like a stranger at her own bloodline's farewell. For the first time since the bank, the humiliation shifted into something sharper. Because the chair with her name on it hadn't been an accident. It had been a message, and now she held the answer in her hands. The first contraction hit in the rideshare on I-90, sharp enough to steal the air from her lungs. Alora gripped the back of the passenger seat. Hospital, she said, not the address on the app. Change it. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, eyes widening at the sight of her. Ma'am, are you? Yes. Another contraction folded her forward. Not the controlled, clinical pain she had coached 100 patients through. This one was hers. Unmanaged, uninsured, alone. Her phone lit up in her lap. Grant Whitfield. Incoming call. For a second, hope moved faster than logic. She answered. I'm in labor, she said. No accusation, just fact. Silence. Then, you shouldn't be traveling this late in the pregnancy. That's irresponsible. I'm on the way to the hospital. A pause. The faint hum of a restaurant in the background. Glasses clinking. Laughter that didn't belong to her life anymore. I have a client dinner, he said. Text me when it's over. The line went dead. Another contraction ripped through her, stronger, closer together. She pressed her forehead against the cool window and watched the dark water of Lake Washington blur past. Her phone vibrated again. Not Grant. A notification from Celeste's account. A video, perfect lighting, pastel decorations. Grant at her side with his hand resting on Celeste's stomach. Both of them laughing as pink confetti exploded over their heads. Our little girl is coming. Alora's breath broke into a sound she didn't recognize. Not a sob. Not a scream. Something animal. The driver accelerated, weaving through traffic. We're almost there, he said, voice tight with urgency. By the time the hospital entrance came into view, her contractions were less than 2 minutes apart. Automatic doors opened. Fluorescent lights. Intake desk. Insurance? The nurse asked without looking up. Alora forced the words out. Lapsed. The keyboard stopped. The nurse looked up now, scanning her, alone, soaked from the rain, a single suitcase at her feet. We'll still treat you, she said, but the tone had changed. Not unkind, just procedural, a category. Alora knew that tone. She had used it herself in overcrowded ERs when the system had already decided how much someone's life was worth. They placed her in a labor room that still smelled faintly of disinfectant in someone else's fear. No partner chair pulled close, no hand to hold, just a monitor beeping in steady, indifferent rhythm. When the next contraction hit, she reached instinctively for the side rail, and her hand closed on empty air. She saw flashes of her old life in brutal contrast. Herself in surgical blues, commanding a trauma team, people moving when she spoke. Dr. Bennett. Now she was a patient with a plastic wristband in a chart that read, self-pay. Hours blurred into pain and breath, and the relentless climb towards something that would change her body forever. At one point, the nurse asked, gently, is there anyone we should call for you? Alora shook her head, because the one person who should have been there had chosen a celebration instead. Because the family who should have filled the room had denied her a chair. Because the only person who had ever called her home was lying in a casket 2,000 miles away. Near dawn, when her strength was almost gone, when the room narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat, the door opened. A different nurse stepped in, holding a clipboard. Dr. Alora Bennett? She asked. The name landed like a shock. Alora turned her head, sweat-soaked, disoriented. Yes, the nurse frowned at the chart. It says here you requested no professional designation. I didn't request. Another contraction cut her off. The nurse studied her face again, something shifting in her expression. Recognition. Respect. You were the trauma surgeon at Harborview, she said quietly. Were. The word hit harder than the pain. Alora pushed through the next wave with everything she had left. Not for Grant. Not for the family that erased her. Not for the life that had collapsed in a bank office, in a church aisle. For the child who had no one else. When the final moment came, when the room filled with the raw, undeniable sound of new life, Alora reached for her daughter and pulled her close, skin to skin, both of them shaking. Outside, the sky was turning gray. Inside, with hospital monitors still beeping and the world still unaware of what had just shifted, Alora looked down at the tiny face against her chest and understood something with absolute clarity. They had taken her name, her money, her marriage, her place, but they had not taken her ability to survive. And somewhere in her bag, beneath the discharge papers and the single change of clothes, the sealed envelope from her mother waited, heavy, silent, and full of answers that were about to change everything. Alora opened the envelope in the hospital bathroom because it was the only place with a lock. Her daughter slept in the bassinet by the window, swaddled tight, unaware that the world outside that thin blanket was already trying to decide what she deserved. Alora washed her hands like she was about to scrub in for surgery, not because it mattered, because rituals kept her steady. The seal tore with a dry snap. Inside was a single letter, a thin key card, and a folded page of instructions with one line underlined 3 times. Do not contact Grant Whitfield. Do not contact your family. Call the number below. Her heart kicked hard enough to hurt. The letter began without softness. Alora, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you came alone. That means they did what I feared they would do. Her throat tightened. She forced herself to keep going. You think you were raised without money? You weren't. You were raised without visibility. Because visibility makes you a target. Alora's hands trembled. She steadied them against the sink. The words didn't read like grief. They read like a plan. When you were 12, I watched a man with influence destroy a woman's life because she refused him. I learned then, the world doesn't just punish women. It punishes women who won't be owned. Alora's stomach turned. Grant's face flashed in her mind, calm, confident, signing her out of her own life. The letter continued. So I built quietly. I built where men don't look. I built in paperwork, in leases, in partnerships that don't carry a woman's face. I became a silent founder of a network that owns the buildings hospitals operate in. Not one building, dozens, across multiple states. Alora stared at the line until the letters blurred. That was impossible. Her mother had worked in a clinic. Her mother had driven an old car. Her mother had told her to focus on school, not status. But then Alora heard her mother's voice, as if it had been waiting inside the paper all along. I did not keep you poor, baby. I kept you protected. Alora's breath left her in a shaky exhale. A sound behind her, her own phone vibrating on the counter. She didn't pick it up, because she already knew who it would be. Her mother's letter didn't let her escape. Grant Whitfield is not the first man to smile at you while reaching for your throat, but he will be the last. If you listen to me. Alora's jaw clenched. You left your career because you believed love required sacrifice. I'm sorry I didn't stop you. I thought distance would keep you safe. I was wrong. So here is the truth you need. The controlling shares of Bennett Medical Holdings are yours. Bennett, her last name. The name Grant had treated like a decoration. A name her own family had just pushed into the back row. Alora's knees went weak. She lowered herself onto the closed toilet lid, the paper shaking in her grip. They will try to shame you. They will try to call you unstable. They will try to take your child and convince the world you are not enough. Let them talk. Let them file. Let them lie. Silence is not weakness, Alora. Silence is strategy. Her eyes snapped to the instruction sheet again. The key card had a logo she didn't recognize. Clean, corporate, expensive. Under it, an address in downtown Chicago, a law firm, a name typed in bold, Larkin, Vale, Cho. Under that, one more line. Ask for Ms. Evelyn Hart. Say, the chair was taken. Alora felt cold all over. This wasn't a sentimental goodbye. This was an exit route. Her phone buzzed again, harder this time. A text banner flashed across the screen. I heard you delivered. I'll send someone to pick up the baby's documents. Pick up, like her child was property. Alora's vision narrowed. Rage rose fast, hot, clean, unfamiliar in its clarity. She looked down at the final paragraph of her mother's letter. You will want revenge. Don't chase it. Build something so solid they can't break it. And when he comes back, because he will, do not give him your pain. Give him your terms. Alora stared at the words until they felt carved into her. Then she folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it inside her hospital bag beneath diapers and discharge papers, hidden in plain sight. Outside the bathroom door, the hospital moved on. Nurses walked, monitors beeped. The world stayed the same. But Alora didn't, because for the first time since the bank, she had something Grant couldn't delete. A name that meant ownership, a number that would answer, and a strategy her mother had been building long before Grant ever learned how to say, I love you, with a smile that didn't mean it. Alora flew to Chicago 10 days after giving birth because waiting felt like drowning. She told the airline clerk her name and watched the computer hesitate, like even the system wasn't sure she was allowed to move freely anymore. She carried her daughter in a front sling, a diaper bag on one shoulder, and the envelope pressed flat against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Grant texted twice before takeoff. Where are you staying? My attorney says we need to schedule mediation. She didn't answer. In Chicago, the address on the instruction sheet led her to a tower of glass and steel that made her feel underdressed before she even stepped through the doors. The lobby security desk looked her up and down. Black woman, newborn, no ring, no entourage. Name? The guard asked, already bored. Alora lifted her chin. Alora Bennett. I have an appointment with Evelyn Hart. He clicked a screen. His posture changed immediately. One moment, Dr. Bennett. Doctor. The title didn't warm her. It stung. A reminder of what she'd been forced to pause. An elevator opened without her touching a button. A woman in a slate gray suit stepped out like she'd been waiting for the exact second Alora arrived. Ms. Hart, silver hair, no jewelry, calm eyes that missed nothing. You opened the letter, she said, not a question. Alora tightened her hold on the baby. I need to know if it's real. Ms. Hart didn't smile. It's real, but the question is whether you can keep it real. She turned and led Alora to the elevator. The doors closed. The car rose fast. Alora's stomach dropped as the numbers climbed. 20, 30, 40, each floor pulling her farther from the woman Grant had tried to trap. On the 52nd floor, the doors opened into quiet. Thick carpet, clean lines. A view of the city that looked like a boardroom had been built in the sky. Miss Hart walked her into a conference room where 3 people were already seated. An older man with careful eyes, a younger woman with a tablet, and a third chair, empty, placed at the head of the table. Alora noticed it immediately. A chair waiting for her. Ms. Hart slid a folder across the table. Before we speak, you need to see what you own. Alora opened it. Pages of property maps, hospital leases, corporate structures layered like armor, numbers that made her brain reject them on instinct. This is Bennett Medical Holdings, Ms. Hart said. Your mother was a silent founder. She structured the company so her name never appeared publicly. Alora swallowed. Why? Because public wealth makes you a target, Ms. Hart answered, as if she'd said it 100 times. And because she had enemies who believed her success belonged to them. The older man leaned forward. Your mother's shares transferred to you upon her death. Controlling interest, 51%. Alora's chest tightened. So I'm the majority owner. You are the owner, Ms. Hart corrected. The board answers to you. The leases answer to you. The investors answer to you. The younger woman tapped her tablet. A list appeared on a screen at the end of the room. Names of hospitals and partner organizations across the country. Then another list. Tenants. Major tenants. Alora's eyes caught on a familiar name and froze. Whitfield Capital Partners. Her breath caught like she'd been punched. Ms. Hart watched her face. You recognize it. That's my husband's firm, Alora said. The words tasted strange now, like they belonged to someone else. Grant is a partner. Yes, Ms. Hart said. His firm leases 2 floors in one of your flagship buildings in Seattle. The lease renews in 90 days. 90 days. Alora stared at the words until her vision sharpened around them. The timeline didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like a fuse. The older man flipped to another page. There's more. Whitfield Capital is also the lead investor in a healthcare startup called Northline Surgical Systems. Their headquarters is in another building you own indirectly. Alora looked up. Indirectly? Ms. Hart leaned in. Your mother built redundancy, shells inside shells, ownership structures that make hostile takeovers difficult. But it also means if you move wrong, you can trigger lawsuits. So what do I do? Alora asked. Ms. Hart's expression didn't change. You do nothing publicly. Not yet. You stay silent. You let him file what he wants to file, and you let him lie where he thinks you can't reach him. Alora's baby shifted against her chest, a tiny sigh, warm and trusting. Alora felt her own heartbeat steady. What's the risk? She asked. Ms. Hart slid one last document across the table. A custody filing draft, already prepared, waiting for Grant's signature. Full custody request. Supervised visitation for Alora. Claims of financial instability. Ms. Hart's voice dropped. He's not just trying to leave you. He's trying to erase you as a mother. The room went quiet. Alora's fingers tightened around the edges of the paper until it bent. She'd thought the bank was the worst part. She'd thought labor alone was the worst part. But this was a declaration of war. Miss Hart pointed to the empty chair at the head of the table. Sit, she said. Alora moved forward and took it. And for the first time since Grant had looked her in the eye and called her unemployed, she felt the shift. Not hope, not healing. Control, cold, clear, and earned. Miss Hart slid a pen toward her. We're going to build your case, she said. And when he comes for your child, we will make sure the court learns something he never expected to be true. Alora picked up the pen. Tell me where to start. she said. The first rule Ms. Hart gave Alora sounded like punishment. You will look broke. Alora blinked. I am broke. He drained everything. Ms. Hart didn't flinch. You will continue to look broke even after we restore what's yours. No designer bags, no new car, no sudden apartment upgrade, nothing that tells your husband you've shifted. Alora glanced down at her daughter. Why? Because Grant Whitfield doesn't lose quietly, Ms. Hart said. The moment he suspects you have resources, he'll change tactics. He'll stall the divorce. He'll smear you harder. He'll chase emergency motions. And if he can't control you financially, he'll try to control you through the baby. The word baby sharpened the room. Alora's voice turned flat. He's already filing for custody, and he wrote his story before you could write yours, Ms. Hart replied. Good, let him commit to it. She pulled out a second folder labeled Silence Protocol, like Alora was a witness in organized crime. Inside were rules, timelines, traps. Rule 1, do not respond to provocation. Rule 2, do not correct lies in public. Rule 3, do not let him see you bleed. Rule 4, everything in writing, always. Rule 5, let him underestimate you. Alora swallowed. So I'm supposed to just take it? Ms. Hart leaned forward. You're not taking it, you're collecting it. Every insult, every lie, every reckless message, those become exhibits. The younger associate, Mara Cho, slid her tablet across the table. We've already pulled his recent filings. His attorney is arguing you're medically unfit because you abandoned your practice. Alora's jaw tightened. He asked me to step back. Of course, Ms. Hart said, and he'll deny it. That's why we're building proof that doesn't rely on your memory. Mara tapped the screen again. A list appeared. Account changes, lease paperwork, insurance cancellations, and a time-stamped confirmation that Alora's medical license renewal email had been opened. From Grant's home IP address. Alora stared at it. He opened my renewal link and didn't submit it, Mara said, which means your unstable finances weren't an accident. They were engineered. The words hit Alora like cold water. Grant hadn't just left. He had designed a cage. Miss Hart stood and walked to the window, looking down at Chicago like it was a chessboard. Your mother built this company with a purpose, not to make you rich, to make you unbreakable. She turned back. But wealth is a weapon that can backfire if you show it too early. Alora's hands clenched. So what do I do while he's dragging my name through court? Ms. Hart held up one finger. You document. Second finger. You stabilize your personal life. Third, you create a quiet paper trail that proves you're a competent mother, a stable home, and a professional with support. Fourth, you let him escalate. Alora's eyes narrowed. You want him to get worse. I want him to reveal himself, Ms. Hart corrected. The court doesn't punish charm, it punishes patterns. As if summoned by the words, Alora's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw Grant's name. My attorney needs your address for service. Also, Celeste is willing to be a character reference. Don't make this ugly. A second message appeared before Alora could breathe. And stop traveling. It makes you look unstable. Alora felt heat rise under her skin, fast and dangerous. Ms. Hart held out her hand without looking at the phone. Let me see. Alora passed it over. Ms. Hart read the text once, then again, slower, like she was tasting the arrogance. Then she handed the phone back. You will respond with one sentence, Ms. Hart said. No emotion, no argument. Alora's throat worked. What sentence? Ms. Hart spoke like a judge delivering a ruling. Tell him you will communicate only through counsel and require all requests in writing. Alora typed with shaking fingers. Alora, please direct all communication through my attorney. All requests must be submitted in writing. Send. The message flew into the void. Alora waited for the familiar rush of regret, for the urge to explain, to soften, to be reasonable. It didn't come. Instead, a new feeling settled in. Distance. Grant responded within seconds. Cute. You found a lawyer. doesn't change reality. Ms. Hart's expression didn't change when Alora showed her. Good, Ms. Hart said. He thinks you're playing defense. Alora looked down at her daughter, sleeping against her chest, small fingers curled like a promise. I want to hurt him, Alora admitted, the honesty tasting like blood. Ms. Hart nodded once. You will, but not with anger. She slid another document across the table, an apartment lease application in Seattle under Alora's name. Modest and clean, paid through a holding entity that couldn't be traced to Bennett Medical Holdings. Your new home, Ms. Hart said. It will look ordinary. It will be stable. It will be yours. Alora's stomach tightened. He'll find out. Eventually, Ms. Hart said, but not before he files what we need him to file. Not before he testifies to what we need him to believe, Mara added, and not before Celeste keeps posting. Alora's eyes lifted. You're watching her too? Ms. Hart's gaze sharpened. We're watching everything because your husband thinks he erased you. She leaned in, voice low. Our job is to let him keep thinking that, right up until the moment the court, the press, and his investors learn he's been standing on property he never owned. Alora's pulse steadied. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence was the blade you hid behind your back until the room stopped laughing. And in 90 days, Grant's lease came due. The first video dropped on a Tuesday morning, the same day Alora's milk finally came in and her sleep finally broke. Celeste Rowe sat in front of a ring light like a confession booth, eyes glossy, voice soft, hands folded like she was praying. I didn't want to say anything, Celeste began, but I'm being forced to protect the truth. Alora watched it on mute at first, her baby on her shoulder, burping cloth in hand, because she learned quickly that sound was what made lies stick to your skin. Then she turned the volume up. Celeste sighed. Grant has been trying to handle a very difficult situation privately. His wife, she's not well. And I hate saying that, but I've seen it. Alora's stomach tightened. Celeste continued, careful and practiced. She left her job. She isolated. She became unpredictable. And now she's using a newborn to manipulate people. Alora's hand went cold on the phone. The comments loaded fast. She's using a baby for sympathy. I knew a woman like this. Toxic. Grant deserves peace. She's lying. She's trying to trap him. Alora blinked once, hard, because her vision had started to shake. Not from tears, but from the sudden rage of being rewritten in public. A ping, then another. Her name appeared on a trending tab. Hashtag Alora Bennett exposed. Mara Cho called immediately. Do not respond. Alora's voice was tight. She's calling me unstable. That's the point, Mara said. She's building a public story that matches Grant's filing. If you react emotionally, they'll call it proof. Another video dropped within hours. Celeste on a couch now, Grant just off frame, his arm visible, casual, protective, as if he was the victim being comforted. Celeste spoke like she was reading from legal notes. She's telling people she was forced out of her accounts. That's not accurate. Grant has supported her for years. He's the one paying everything. He's the one trying to do the right thing. Alora's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A screenshot of the video with one line, "You better stop." Then another message, this time from Grant. Your friends are sending me your sob story. Cut it out. You're making yourself look worse. Alora stared at the screen, breath shallow. She hadn't posted anything. She hadn't spoken to anyone. And still they were assigning her a narrative. Loud, desperate, unstable, because the internet loved a villain more than it loved a woman in silence. Her sister-in-law, Grant's cousin, left a voicemail. Alora, I'm just saying, people are talking. It might be better if you let Grant have the baby for now until you're settled. Settled, like she was furniture. Alora's fingers dug into the edge of the kitchen counter in her small apartment. The place Ms. Hart had set up was clean, quiet, safe, ordinary on purpose. But the walls felt thinner now, as if comments could seep through drywall. A knock came at the door. Alora froze. Another knock, harder. She peered through the peephole and saw a man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard. a lanyard around his neck. "Ma'am," he called, voice muffled. "Child Services, we have a report." The room went silent except for her baby's small breathing. Her knees threatened to give. Her mind flashed through worst-case scenarios the way it used to in trauma bays. Fast, brutal, efficient. She opened the door only enough to speak. "I need identification." The man lifted a badge and a card. "We received concern about your mental stability and the safety of the infant." Alora felt her pulse in her teeth. A report? From who? She already knew. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She didn't raise her voice. Ms. Hart's rules echoed like a metronome in her skull. Collect it. Document it. Alora stepped back and let him in. She kept her hands visible. She kept her voice even. She answered every question. She showed the clean crib, the stocked diapers, the pediatrician appointment calendar on the fridge. She showed the baby's weight chart, the feeding log, the receipts. The investigator looked around, confused by how normal everything was. "You're alone?" he asked. Alora held his gaze. "Yes, that's hard," he said, almost sympathetic. She didn't soften. Sympathy could turn into suspicion with one wrong emotion. When he finally left, he paused at the door. "Ma'am, I don't see any immediate issues, but you should know people don't file reports like this unless they're trying to start something." Alora closed the door and locked it with shaking hands. Her phone buzzed again. Celeste had posted a story, a black screen with white text. "When a mother is unstable, the child pays first." The comments exploded. "Call CPS again. Save that baby. She's dangerous. Grant is a hero." Alora sank onto the couch with her baby in her arms, chest tight, breath trapped. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was strategy. They were building a public file to match the court file. So if the judge ever hesitated, the internet would already be screaming the verdict. Her hands moved automatically, like a surgeon in crisis. She opened a folder on her laptop labeled Evidence, created by Ms. Hart's team. She saved everything. Videos, captions, comment threads, timestamps, the CPS visit record, Grant's texts, the unknown threat. One by one, she turned the noise into paper. Then her phone lit up with a new message from Grant, the arrogance in it almost casual. "You could make this stop. Just agree to my terms." Alora stared at the words until her breathing slowed. They wanted her to break. They wanted her to beg. They wanted her to react so they could point and say, "See?" She looked down at her daughter, tiny and warm against her chest, and felt the shift inside her. Small, but real. Not despair, focus. Because Grant and Celeste thought the internet was the battlefield. They didn't realize Alora had a different one. And on that field, evidence mattered more than followers. She typed one response, cold, simple, final. "Alora, all communication through counsel. Send." Across town, in a penthouse Grant still believed he owned, he was smiling. He thought he was burying her. He didn't know she was gathering the dirt, one shovel at a time, until she had enough to bury him back. The courtroom was smaller than Alora expected. No dramatic lighting, no echo, just fluorescent bulbs, hard benches, and a judge who had already read the filings before either of them walked in. Grant arrived first, tailored suit, calm smile, the same posture he used in investor meetings, the body language of a man who assumed the outcome had been decided in his favor. Celeste sat in the second row behind him, dressed in soft neutrals, eyes lowered, the image of quiet support for a man carrying too much. Alora entered alone, her daughter in a structured carrier against her chest, her attorney on her left, Mara Cho on her right with a tablet full of timestamps and transcripts. Grant's eyes moved over her once, taking in the modest dress, the absence of jewelry, the simple shoes. His mouth tilted, still broke, still small, still manageable. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something that made them both smile. The bailiff called the room to order. Grant's attorney stood first, voice smooth, sympathetic. "Your Honor, Mr. Whitfield is not here to punish his wife. He is here to protect his child." Dr. Bennett has demonstrated a pattern of instability, unemployment, relocation without notice, isolation, and documented emotional volatility online. Alora didn't move. Rule 1, do not react. The attorney continued, stacking the narrative like bricks. She allowed her medical license to lapse. She has no current income. She lives alone with no family support. Child Protective Services has already made a visit to her residence. The words landed exactly as designed. Concern, structure, safety. Grant took the stand next. He placed his hand on the Bible and looked at the judge with practiced humility. I loved my wife, he began. I still do. But since the pregnancy, she's changed. She pushed everyone away. She refused help. I've been covering all expenses for years. Lie. 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 Alora felt each one hit her body like a physical blow, and still she didn't move. Grant lowered his voice, as if it hurt him to say the next part. I'm afraid for my daughter's future if nothing changes. Celeste dabbed at her eye in the gallery. The judge watched everything. Not just the words, the performance. Ms. Hart had warned her, this hearing is not about winning. It's about locking him into a story he can't escape. Alora's attorney didn't object, didn't interrupt, didn't cross-examine aggressively. Just let Grant talk. Let him elaborate. Let him commit. Dr. Bennett has no stable housing, Grant added, confident now. She moves constantly. Mara's stylus paused above the screen, marking the timestamp. Perjury. Grant leaned forward slightly. I am prepared to offer supervised visitation. I don't want to remove her from the child's life. I just want what's best. Generous, reasonable, controlled. The judge nodded slowly, making notes. When it was Alora's turn, her attorney stood. Dr. Bennett, where are you currently residing? In Seattle, she answered. Do you have a lease? Yes. Is it stable housing? Yes. Grant's smile flickered. He hadn't known. Do you have documentation of pediatric care for the child? The attorney asked. Yes. Feeding logs? Yes. Medical follow-ups for yourself? Yes. Each answer landed like a quiet correction to the story Grant had told. No speeches, no defense, just facts. Her attorney stopped there. No emotional appeal, no attack. Grant's lawyer looked almost amused when they declined to cross-examine further. He thought they had nothing. The judge leaned back. I will take the temporary custody request under advisement and issue a preliminary ruling within 72 hours. Grant exhaled, relaxed, already certain. As the courtroom began to empty, he stepped into Alora's path. Up close, his voice lost the softness he'd used on the stand. You're dragging this out, he said under his breath. You can't win this. You don't have the resources. Alora met his eyes for the first time since the bank. There was no anger in her face. That unsettled him more than anything. You already told the court everything you believe is true, she said. Grant smirked. Because it is. Good, she replied. He studied her, something small and sharp moving behind his confidence. You should have settled, he added. This will get ugly. Alora shifted the baby carrier slightly on her shoulder, steady, unhurried. It already is, she said. Then she walked past him. Grant turned to watch her leave, the first crack appearing in his certainty, not because of what she had said, but because of what she hadn't. No tears, no pleading, no attempt to negotiate. Across the hall, Mara handed Miss Hart a printed transcript of Grant's testimony. Every claim, every timeline, every statement made under oath. Locked. Ms. Hart closed the folder with a quiet, satisfied motion. The trap is set, she said. Inside the courtroom, Grant was still shaking hands with his attorney, still smiling for Celeste, still convinced the hearing had gone exactly the way he wanted. He didn't understand that the more confident he had sounded, the less room he had left to move. 72 hours. That was all the time it would take for the story he had built to begin collapsing under the weight of the truth he had just sworn to. The boardroom didn't know she was coming. That was the point. Alora sat at the far end of the polished table, a slim folder in front of her, her name printed in small type on the agenda as A. Bennett, proxy holder. No one looked twice. To them, she was just another legal formality in a meeting about lease renewals in capital exposure. Grant walked in 10 minutes late. He moved the way he always had, owning the air, shaking hands, smiling like every square foot of the building belonged to him. It did not. He didn't see her. He took his usual seat beside the Northline Surgical Systems CEO and began outlining the expansion strategy for their Seattle headquarters. His voice confident, measured, already projecting profit curves onto the screen. "We'll secure a long-term extension on this space," he said, capping the rendering of the building. "Same terms. The landlord has no incentive to disrupt a tenant at our scale." Alora watched the room nod. Investors trusted certainty, and Grant had built his entire reputation on being the man who could guarantee it. At the head of the table, the property management chair cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, we need to address the restructuring clause tied to this lease." Grant didn't look concerned. "Standard language. Our attorneys reviewed it." Mara, seated beside Alora, slid a single page across the table. "Not this version," she said. For the first time, Grant glanced down the length of the table and saw Alora. The reaction was instant, not shock, calculation. He leaned back in his chair, recovering fast enough that most of the room missed it. "I didn't realize this was a family meeting," he said lightly. Alora didn't respond. She didn't need to. The property chair continued. "Bennett Medical Holdings exercised a controlling review of all legacy leases last quarter. The new terms require updated financial disclosures from all anchor tenants." Grant's smile held, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. "Whitfield Capital has never had an issue providing documentation." "Good," Mara said, her tone neutral. "Because your current leverage ratio triggers the renegotiation clause." The screen changed. Numbers replaced projections. Debt exposure. Overextended capital. A dependency on the Northline deal that hadn't closed yet. Grant's voice sharpened. "Those figures are confidential. They were submitted as part of your renewal request," Mara replied, "which makes them part of the review." The room shifted. Investors stopped looking at Grant and started looking at the data. Alora opened her folder for the first time. Inside was the lease. The original signature line, Whitfield Capital Partners, managing partner, Grant Whitfield. His name. On a contract he had always treated like background noise. "You're out of compliance with the revised terms," Mara continued, "which gives Bennett Medical Holdings the option to shorten the renewal window to 90 days. 90 days, the same number that had been ticking in Alora's head since the first meeting in Chicago. Grant's gaze locked on her now, all pretense gone. "You're enjoying this." "No," Alora said, her voice calm, steady, carrying across the table without effort. "I'm attending a business review." A few people in the room exchanged glances. Because this wasn't personal, it was structural. Grant turned to the property chair. "You can't make a decision of this scale without a full board vote." The chair folded his hands. "We're not making a decision today. We're informing you of your position." Position. Tenant, not owner. Grant's phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it. "Whitfield Capital has been a cornerstone of this building," he pressed. "Disrupting our lease disrupts your own valuation." Alora finally looked directly at him. "You built your valuation on space you don't control," she said. "That's not disruption. That's risk." The CEO of Northline shifted uncomfortably. "Grant, is there an issue with the financing?" Grant didn't answer. Because answering would confirm the numbers, and the numbers were no longer in his favor. Mara slid another document forward. "Per the clause, you have 90 days to cure the deficiency or vacate." The room went silent. Grant laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. "You're trying to evict my firm." "No," Alora said. "We're enforcing a contract." His eyes burned into hers. "This is retaliation." "This is math," she replied. The property chair stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "We'll expect your updated disclosures within 30 days. Chairs moved, papers gathered. The meeting dissolved into low, urgent conversations that didn't include Grant anymore. He stayed seated. So did Alora. When the room emptied, He spoke without looking at her. You think this gives you leverage in court? She closed her folder. This has nothing to do with court. That's a lie. It's a business review, she repeated. He stood then, anger breaking through the polish. You're going to destroy a firm that funds half your lifestyle. Alora rose slowly, the difference in their positions now unmistakable. My lifestyle, she said, is not funded by you. The words landed harder than any accusation. Grant stared at her like he was seeing a new language and didn't know how to translate it. You're making a mistake, he said. No, Alora answered. You made one. You just didn't know the lease had your name on it. She walked past him toward the glass wall overlooking the city. Below them, Chicago moved in clean lines and sharp angles, indifferent to who owned what. Behind her, Grant picked up his phone at last. His expression changed as he read the screen. Confusion first, then something closer to fear. Investor messages, questions, requests for clarification. The first, tremors. Alora didn't turn around, because for the first time since the bank, since the funeral, since the night she labored alone, Grant Whitfield was standing inside a structure he could not control. And the clock had started. Grant saw the announcement before anyone called him. Bennett Medical Holdings, major public initiative, live press event, Chicago Riverfront. He read the release twice, then a third time, because the name at the bottom didn't make sense. Chairwoman, Dr. Alora Bennett. The glass in his office reflected a version of him that had never lost a negotiation. That man didn't exist anymore. By the time Alora stepped onto the riverfront stage, the media had already built the story without her. Healthcare expansion, community reinvestment, post-pandemic infrastructure, millions in capital. None of them knew the real headline yet. The wind came off the waters sharp and cold, pressing the fabric of her coat against her body, the same way the hospital gown had clung to her the night she gave birth. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Miss Hart stood to her right, Mara to her left, a row of executives behind her, people who had spent years taking instructions from a name they had never seen in public. Now they were watching her, waiting. Across the crowd, she spotted him. Grant had pushed through the reporters, no tie, jaw tight, phone in his hand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Celeste was beside him, filming, her face composed for an audience that didn't yet understand they were about to lose their narrative. Alora stepped to the podium. The microphones carried the sound of her breath across the speakers before she said a single word. Good morning, she began, her voice even, trained by years of calling trauma codes in rooms where panic killed people. We're here to announce the Bennett Initiative for Maternal Health Access. A screen behind her lit up, renderings of clinics, housing partnerships, surgical training programs for physicians returning to the workforce after caregiving breaks. A direct answer to every lie that had been told about her. Grant stopped moving. Reporters started typing. Alora continued. For decades, critical medical infrastructure has been controlled by entities that never meet the patients whose lives depend on it. Today, that changes. She didn't look at him. Not yet. This initiative is funded and operated by Bennett Medical Holdings. A ripple moved through the crowd. Because the name meant power in real estate, in hospital systems, in investment circles. But the face at the podium didn't match the old assumptions. I stand here not only as a surgeon, she said, but as the majority owner of this company. The words hit like a structural collapse. Grant's phone slipped in his hand. Celeste's livestream kept running, her followers flooding the chat with confusion. Wait, his wife? That's her? She owns what? Alora let the silence expand just long enough to become irreversible. For years, Bennett Medical Holdings operated without a public founder. That was intentional. Today, we're changing that model. Camera shutters exploded. Grant pushed forward, security stopping him at the barricade. You don't get to do this, he shouted, the control gone from his voice for the first time since the bank. The microphones picked it up. Every network in the city broadcast it live. Alora turned then, not in surprise, in acknowledgement. The power dynamic flipped in real time. You removed my name from a bank account, she said, her voice carrying across the riverfront, calm, surgical. but you never owned the buildings your firm stood in. The crowd reacted, sharp, electric. Reporters pivoted toward Grant like predators sensing blood. Mr. Whitfield, does your firm lease space from Bennett Medical Holdings? Were you aware your wife held controlling interest? Is this connected to the custody filing? Celeste lowered her phone. For the first time since she had entered Alora's life, she looked small. Alora returned her attention to the press. This initiative will prioritize physicians whose careers were interrupted by caregiving, she said, and mothers who were told they were financially disposable. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They were specific, personal. Grant stopped fighting the barricade because every investor watching the broadcast was doing the same calculation. Lease dependency, debt exposure, credibility. Alora finished the announcement without raising her voice once. Funding secured, partnership signed, construction timeline set, not revenge, infrastructure. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, the first one cut straight through the air. Dr. Bennett, is this your response to the claims made about your financial instability and fitness as a parent? Grant closed his eyes, because there was no answer she could give that would save him. Alora didn't hesitate. I don't build responses, she said. I build systems. Flashbulbs turned the stage white. Behind the cameras, phones lit up across trading floors and boardrooms. Whitfield Capital's name began to trend for a different reason. Alora stepped back from the podium. The executives behind her moved in close. No longer distant figures in a corporate structure, but a visible wall of alignment. Grant stood on the other side of the barricade, surrounded now, not by supporters, but by journalists asking for comment he couldn't shape. Their eyes met one last time across the distance. At the bank, he had erased her with a signature. Here, in front of the city, she had rewritten the terms of his existence without touching him at all. And somewhere in the financial district, screens were updating in real time, numbers shifting, confidence collapsing, the first measurable signs that the structure he had built his life on was beginning to fail. Hour 1 started with a phone call Grant didn't take. By hour 3, his assistant stopped knocking and started texting. Urgent, investors asking for clarification. Urgent, need statement. Urgent, Northline wants emergency meeting. Grant stood in the center of his office, watching the live replay of the Riverfront press conference on mute, as if removing the sound could undo what had been said. Majority owner. The words had already moved through every financial channel that mattered. By hour 6, the first investor pulled out. Not publicly, not dramatically. A quiet email. Given recent structural uncertainties, we are pausing our participation pending review. Pausing meant leaving. Grant called them back. Voicemail. Alora didn't watch the coverage. She sat in Ms. Hart's conference room, her daughter asleep beside her, reviewing a timeline Mara had built. Color-coded, precise, merciless. Lease exposure, debt triggers, investor exit windows. Northline can't close without the Seattle headquarters, Mara said, and they can't keep the headquarters without curing the lease deficiency. Ms. Hart added, which they can't cure without capital. And the capital is leaving, Alora finished. Not with satisfaction, with clarity, because this wasn't revenge. This was gravity. Hour 12. Grant's partners stopped using his first name. They used we. We need to discuss your personal situation. We were not informed of your conflict of interest. We are exposed. Grant slammed his hand against the table. This has nothing to do with the firm. It has everything to do with the firm, the senior partner replied. You're in a custody battle with the controlling landlord of our primary asset. The room went silent. No one defended him. Hour 18. Celeste posted a statement. A carefully worded paragraph about focusing on her own well-being and stepping away from negativity. Their photos disappeared. The engagement speculation stopped. Her followers moved on to the next story within minutes. Grant called her. Blocked. Hour 24. The bank requested a meeting, not a courtesy, a compliance review. The line of credit that had always been automatic was now under evaluation. Grant heard the same phrase 3 times in one day. Material change in risk profile. He drove to the penthouse and found the concierge waiting. Sir, management needs updated documentation for the leaseholder of record. Leaseholder. The unit had always been tied to the firm. The firm was now reviewing him. For the first time, he saw the space not as his home, but as something contingent. Hour 36. The court issued the preliminary custody ruling. Temporary joint custody. No emergency removal. The judge's note was short. The court requires verified financial disclosures from both parties before further determination. Grant read it twice. His entire case had been built on her instability. Now the court wanted numbers. Real ones. Numbers he no longer controlled. Hour 48. The partners voted not to remove him. Not yet, but to suspend him from active deal leadership pending internal review. His access card stopped working on the executive floor. Security was polite. Always polite. Temporary measure, sir. Temporary meant he no longer had a room. Alora received the update in a single sentence from Ms. Hart. He's been sidelined. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not in relief, not in triumph, but in recognition. The system was doing what it was designed to do when someone became a liability. Hour 60. Grant finally came to the building he used to walk into like an owner. He stood across the street, looking up at the glass facade that now carried her company's name in clean metal letters. He didn't go inside because access required authorization, and authorization required her. Hour 72. His phone rang with a number he couldn't ignore. His mother. Grant, she said, her voice tight, controlled, the way it had always been when she was about to deliver a verdict. You need to fix this. I am fixing it, he snapped. No, she replied. You need to speak to her. The word landed like an insult. She's doing this to you, his mother continued, which means she can stop. Grant looked up at the building again, at the reflection of himself in the glass. For the first time since the bank, he understood the position. Tenant, petitioner, defendant. He ended the call without answering. Across the city, Alora fed her daughter in the quiet of the apartment that had been chosen for its anonymity. Her phone lay on the table, screen dark. She knew the messages were coming. Investors, reporters, requests for comment. Grant. But for the first time in months, the urgency wasn't hers. The clock that had once been used against her was now measuring his options. And the collapse everyone else saw as sudden had in truth been built from the moment he decided she had nothing. 72 hours. That was all it had taken for the narrative to reverse. Not because she had attacked him, but because she had stopped trying to survive inside a system he controlled and stepped into one he didn't. The second hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., but by 8:15, every seat was taken. Not by family, by press. Grant noticed that first. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the hallway outside had turned into a live broadcast zone. Analysts talking about lease exposure, legal commentators dissecting the Bennett reversal, his name used as a case study in risk management. He had once controlled rooms like this. Now he was walking into one. Alora arrived last. Same calm, same measured pace, no performance. Her daughter wasn't with her this time. That alone shifted the air, because today wasn't about survival. It was about judgment. Grant's attorney leaned in. We stay on financial instability. That's still our strongest argument. Grant nodded, but the confidence didn't reach his eyes, because for the first time, he didn't know what she was holding. The judge entered, and the room rose. Dr. Bennett, Mr. Whitfield, she began, voice neutral. This court requested verified disclosures. We will proceed with those. Grant's attorney stood first, moving fast. Your Honor, while recent media activity has created confusion, the core issue remains unchanged. My client has been the sole financial provider for this child. Alora's attorney didn't object. He let the sentence finish. Then he stood. Your Honor, we submit Exhibit A through H, certified ownership documents for Bennett Medical Holdings, including controlling shares transferred to Dr. Bennett upon the death of her mother. The courtroom stilled. Paper moved to the judge. Grant's attorney froze mid-breath. The judge adjusted her glasses, reading. "Dr. Bennett," she said, looking up, "you are the majority owner of this entity." "Yes, Your Honor." "Since when?" "Since my mother's passing." The transfer was automatic. Grant turned in his chair, actually turned, like he had to see her again to confirm she was real. His attorney whispered, sharp and urgent, "You didn't tell me this." Grant didn't answer, because he hadn't known. Alora's attorney continued, each word placed with surgical precision. Exhibit 1. Documentation of Mr. Whitfield accessing Dr. Bennett's medical license renewal portal from a shared IP address and failing to complete the submission. Grant's head snapped forward. "That's Mr. Whitfield," the judge said without raising her voice. "You will wait." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Exhibit J, the attorney said, account withdrawal records showing unilateral removal of joint funds 2 weeks before Dr. Bennett gave birth. Grant's earlier testimony echoed in the room. "I have been covering all expenses for years." The timeline on the screen contradicted him. Clean, undeniable, locked under oath. His attorney tried to recover. "Your Honor, this is a property matter, not a custody matter. It is a credibility matter," the judge replied. Grant felt the shift in the room like pressure in his ears. Not sympathy, not neutrality, assessment. He was no longer the stable parent protecting a child. He was a man whose sworn statements were dissolving in real time. Then the character witnesses, not emotional pleas. Data, the pediatrician, the lactation consultant, the home visit report from Child Services stating no concerns. Each one dismantled a piece of the story he had built. When it was Alora's turn to speak, she didn't stand immediately. She waited until the judge looked directly at her. "Dr. Bennett," the judge said, "is there anything you would like the court to understand that is not in these documents?" Alora rose. Not as a victim, not as a CEO, as a mother who had learned how systems worked. "I did not respond to the public statements made about me," she said, voice steady, caring without force. "Because I was advised to let the legal process rely on facts." She paused. "I did not disclose my financial position earlier because I was told it would escalate the conflict and be used to prolong these proceedings." Grant closed his eyes. Because every word confirmed the trap. "I have stable housing," she continued. "I have independent income. I have returned my medical license to active status and scheduled my re-entry training." The judge nodded once. Not approval, recognition. Alora finished with the only thing that wasn't a document. "I am not asking the court to punish Mr. Whitfield. I am asking the court to see that the narrative presented about my ability to care for my child was constructed, not factual." She sat down. Grant didn't look at her, because there was nothing left to challenge that didn't make him look worse. The judge reviewed her notes in silence. Every second stretched. Finally, "Temporary joint custody remains in place," she said, "with primary physical custody awarded to Dr. Bennett." The air left Grant's body in a visible drop. "Mr. Whitfield will provide full, verified financial disclosures within 14 days, the judge continued. Further, the court notes discrepancies between prior testimony and submitted evidence. Counsel will address this before the next hearing. Discrepancies. A polite word for perjury. The gavel fell. Grant stood slowly, like the room had tilted. People were already moving around him, the press waiting outside for the first statement. His attorney was speaking, fast, low, urgent. He didn't hear any of it. Because across the aisle, Alora was gathering her files with the same controlled precision she used to prep for surgery. No smile, no glance of triumph, just completion. As she walked past him, he spoke without thinking. "You planned this." She stopped, looked at him, not with anger, not with pity. "With preparation," she said. Then she walked out into the hallway where the cameras were waiting. Not for a scandal, not for a victim, but for the woman the court had just confirmed could not be erased. Grant found her address the same way he found everything, through people who owed him favors. He showed up at 9:17 p.m. when he assumed the baby would be asleep and Alora would be tired enough to soften. The knock was controlled, not urgent, not apologetic. Ownership in a rhythm. Alora didn't open the door right away. She checked the peephole, saw him standing there in a dark coat, hair damp from rain, face composed like he'd rehearsed regret in the mirror. She opened the door with the chain still latched. "What do you want?" Her voice was flat. Grant's eyes flicked past her shoulder, scanning the apartment like an appraiser. Small, clean, minimal, no signs of wealth, no panic. "You don't have to live like this," he said. Alora didn't move. "Say what you came to say." He exhaled like he'd been wronged by her tone. "I came to talk without lawyers." "That's not happening." His jaw tightened. Then he forced the softer voice, the one he used on investors when he needed them to trust him. "I didn't know about your mother," he said. "If I had known, things would have been different." Alora stared at him. "Different how?" He hesitated. That hesitation was the truth slipping through. "Alora, we both made mistakes," he said. "But none of this had to become public. That press conference." "You mean the moment you couldn't control the story anymore?" She cut in. Grant's eyes flashed. "I'm trying to fix this." "Fix what?" she asked. "The custody case you filed? The bank account you emptied? The license you let expire?" His face tightened at the last one. "Don't do that," he snapped, the mask cracking. "You can't prove intent." Alora held his gaze. "The court doesn't need intent. It needs pattern." Grant swallowed, recalibrating. "I was under pressure," he said quickly. "My partners, my mother, the optics. You were unpredictable." "Say it," Alora replied. He blinked. "Say what?" "The word you used in your filing," she said, voice steady. "Say unstable to my face." Grant's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Not because he suddenly felt shame, but because he realized she was forcing him to stand inside his own lies. He tried a different angle. "Celeste is gone," he said, as if that was proof of loyalty. "She used the situation. She's out of my life." Alora's expression didn't change. "You think that's a gift?" Grant stepped closer. The chain caught, stopping the door from opening further. He looked down at the barrier like it offended him. "I miss my daughter," he said, voice thick now, aiming for emotion. "Let me see her." Alora didn't flinch. "Not without the visitation schedule. Not without a witness. Not without your attorney confirming it." Grant's patience snapped. "This is my child," he hissed. "You don't get to gatekeep her from me because you're angry." Alora leaned forward, close enough that he could see she wasn't afraid. "You tried to take her from me before she was even born," she said. "You tried to make the world believe I was dangerous so you could look like the hero." Grant's eyes went hard. "You would have lost." Alora smiled once, not warm, not cruel. "Certain. I didn't lose," she said. "You did." He stared at her, chest rising and falling faster now. "This doesn't have to end like this," he said. "We can reset. We can—" "You can't reset what you revealed," Alora replied. "You showed me who you are when you think I have no options." Grant's voice dropped. "You're punishing me." "I'm setting boundaries," she corrected. A sound came from the back of the apartment, a soft baby noise, shifting in sleep. Grant's head turned toward it, instinct pulling him forward. Alora's hand moved faster than his body. She stepped into the doorway fully now, blocking the line of sight, her voice quiet but lethal. "Do not take another step." Grant froze. The silence between them was sharp. He looked at her the way men like him looked at women they couldn't place anymore, like she had changed category. From wife to obstacle to threat. "You think you're untouchable now," he said. Alora's eyes didn't move. "I think I'm done negotiating with someone who only respects power." Grant's lips curled. "So what? This is it? You win?" Alora tilted her head slightly. "This isn't a game." "It is for you," he shot back. "You got your little moment. You got the cameras. You got the judge. Now what?" Alora's voice stayed calm, but every word landed like a door closing. "Now," she said, "you follow the court order." Grant stared at her, breathing harder, and for a second she saw it. the impulse to push, to force, to reclaim control the way he always had. Then he remembered the hallway full of cameras, the judge's tone, the partners who stopped using his first name. He backed up half a step, choosing survival over impulse. His face settled into something colder. "You're making enemies," he warned. Alora's mouth didn't move. "I'm recognizing them." Grant held her gaze, searching for the old Alora, the one who explained, who softened, who tried to keep peace. He didn't find her. Finally, he nodded once. "Not agreement, a promise. This isn't over," he said. Alora leaned against the doorframe, chain still latched, voice steady. "It is," she replied. "You just don't know it yet." She closed the door. The lock clicked. And for the first time, Grant Whitfield was standing in a hallway with nothing left to take, because everything he could steal from her had already been replaced by something he didn't understand. Control that didn't require him. The first board vote under Alora's direct leadership lasted 9 minutes. Not because the stakes were small, because the structure had already been written. "Item 1, Mara said, sliding the proposal onto the screen. "Maternal Reentry Surgical Fellowship. Paid. Full malpractice coverage. On-site childcare." A board member cleared his throat. "That's not our traditional investment model." Alora didn't look at him. "It is now." The vote passed. Unanimous. Power had changed the room, not her tone. Grant watched the announcement on a delay in an office that no longer had his name on the door. Bennett Fellowship, National Rollout. He muted the screen when the camera cut to Alora walking through a hospital corridor beside a line of women in scrubs. Women who looked like they had been paused mid-career and then handed time back. He recognized the strategy. She wasn't just repairing her life. She was building a pipeline, a workforce, an alliance. Investors who had once taken his calls now returned hers first. Back in Chicago, Alora stood inside a construction site that had been an abandoned clinic 3 months earlier. Hard hat, steel beams, blueprints spread across a temporary table. "This wing is transitional housing," the project manager said. 6-month placements tied to employment contracts. "And legal offices?" Alora asked. "Second floor, family court prep, licensing reinstatement, financial planning. A system, not charity." Every exit point she had faced now had an infrastructure around it. No woman walking out of a bank erased. No mother sitting in a courtroom alone. No surgeon losing a license because someone else controlled the email. Ms. Hart joined her, reading from a tablet. 3 more hospital groups signed partnership agreements this morning. "Conditions?" Alora asked. "Return to work guarantees for physicians after caregiving gaps." Alora nodded once. "Terms. Always terms." The media called it a redemption story. They were wrong. Redemption implied she had needed saving. This was expansion. At Whitfield Capital, the partners held a closed-door meeting. Grant wasn't invited. The official statement came out that afternoon. Leadership restructuring in response to strategic misalignment. His remaining equity converted to a long-term payout. No voting power, no active role. Clean, professional. Final. He called 3 people who didn't answer. Then his mother. "This is your fault," she said without greeting. Grant almost laughed, because for the first time in his life, blame had nowhere to land that would change the outcome. Alora's re-entry into surgery happened at 5:40 a.m. on a Tuesday. No press, no announcement, just a trauma pager going off and muscle memory snapping back into place. "Dr. Bennett, we've got a GSW en route." The resident said it like it had never been interrupted. She scrubbed in, hands steady, mind clear, the operating room moving around her like a language she had never forgotten. Not because she needed the job, because she chose it. When the patient stabilized and the monitors settled into rhythm, she stepped back and let the team close. Choice, that was the difference. Celeste tried to relaunch. A rebrand, wellness, healing, lessons learned. The comments didn't follow. Her audience had moved to Alora's initiative, sharing application links, posting acceptance letters, tagging each other in stories about starting over with contracts in hand. Narrative had migrated, and Celeste's version no longer paid. The custody schedule ran like clockwork. Drop-offs in monitored spaces, digital logs, no deviations. Grant arrived early every time, as if punctuality could rebuild credibility. He tried once to speak beyond the agreed script. Alora raised one hand, not in anger, in procedure. We follow the order. He stopped, because the system didn't respond to tone. Late one evening, Alora walked through the first completed housing floor. Rooms lit, cribs assembled. A woman at the far end sat on a bed, holding a newborn. Paperwork spread beside her. Employment contract, child care enrollment, legal consultation scheduled for the next morning. The woman looked up. "Are you Dr. Bennett?" she asked, voice unsure. Alora nodded. The woman stood, eyes filling. "They told me this place existed because of you." Alora shook her head once. "It exists because the system failed too many people." She kept walking, not out of modesty, out of accuracy. At the next board meeting, the final item appeared on the agenda. Whitfield Capital, lease resolution. Mara presented the options: cure the deficiency under revised terms, or vacate. Grant's former partners requested a private negotiation. Alora listened without interrupting. They offered concessions, long-term commitments, public alignment with the Bennett Initiative. Survive, not dominance. Approved, Alora said, setting new terms that locked the building into her network for the next 20 years. Grant's name disappeared from the lease, not in documentation. That night, alone in her apartment, Alora reviewed the updated organizational chart. Clinics, housing, legal, training programs, each one connected. Each one designed to make the next woman's fall shorter than hers had been. Her daughter slept in the next room, the soft rhythm of her breathing steady through the monitor. Alora, for the first time since the bank, the funeral, the labor room, the courtroom, there was no immediate crisis waiting. No incoming threat. The system was running, and it didn't depend on anyone who had once tried to erase her. The house in Chicago had been empty for years. Alora unlocked the door with the key Ms. Hart had given her months ago, the one she hadn't been ready to use until now. Her daughter sat on her hip, warm and curious, small fingers tangled in the collar of Alora's coat. This was no audience, no board vote, no courtroom, just choice. The chair from the funeral stood in the living room, the white ribbon gone, her name no longer printed on paper, but written into the deed. Alora Bennett, owner. She set her daughter down on the floor and watched her take unsteady steps across the hardwood, towards sunlight that poured through the windows like something earned. Her phone buzzed once. A notification from the court portal. Final order. Custody determination filed. She opened it, standing there in the center of the house that had once been used to measure her absence. Primary custody confirmed. Financial disclosures accepted. Perjury review referred for separate action. No drama, just law. Grant had lost the last structure he thought he could control. She didn't call anyone. She didn't celebrate, because the victory had already happened the day she stopped asking to be believed. A second message came through, an email forwarded by Ms. Hart. Whitfield Capital had signed the long-term lease under her revised terms. His name wasn't on it. Not erased, irrelevant. Alora walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer her mother used to keep sealed. Inside was the same handwritten recipe card for cornbread she had memorized as a child. For years, she thought it was a symbol of a smaller life. Now she understood it had been a cover for a larger one. Her daughter tugged at her leg. Alora lifted her, pressed her face into the soft curve of her neck, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself since the bank. Not relief, not revenge, freedom. Not the kind you fight for, the kind you design. She moved through the house slowly, not searching for the past, not trying to rebuild it, just placing new things where she wanted them to be. A crib in the room that overlooked the street, her medical textbooks on a shelf beside her mother's old files, a framed photo of the riverfront press conference leaning casually against the wall, not centered, not permanent. Because this life wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about living in a space no one else could take. At sunset, she sat on the front steps with her daughter in her lap as the city moved around them. Cars passing, people walking dogs, ordinary life continuing without knowing what it had taken to get here. For the first time, there was no next battle waiting, no trap to anticipate, no silence to weaponize. Just a future she was allowed to enter without permission. Her phone buzzed again, this time with messages from women across the country. Photos in scrubs, keys to new apartments, babies in cribs inside buildings she had funded. Because of you, I started again. Because of this program, I got my license back. Because you didn't quit, neither did I. Alora read them all, one by one, her daughter's head resting against her chest, the rhythm of 2 heartbeats finally steady. She had spent so long surviving, then rebuilding. Now, for the first time, she was choosing. Not the life she had been given, not the life she had fought to recover. Her own. She looked out at the street, at the horizon beyond it, and smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the court, not for anyone who had ever doubted her. For herself. And if this story found you at the moment you think everything has been taken, remember this. The day they erase you can become the day you begin. Follow for more stories about women who turn survival into power. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because your next chapter might be closer than you think.